All right, we're previewing the Big Ten Championship, and joining me now to do that is Aaron McMann. Aaron, let's start with Blake Corum. Reports that he is going to have knee surgery. What's his availability for the playoffs?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like he's going to give it a go. He banged up the knee a few weeks ago against Ohio State. At the time, Jim Harbaugh said there was no structural damage, so we were curious how long he was going to be out. He tried to give it a go last week against Ohio State, played a handful of carries, had about a handful of plays. He played 2 carries, didn't do a whole lot, and they ended up pulling him out due to the injury. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport reported on Thursday that he was going to get season-ending surgery, so it sounds like they're shutting him down for the postseason.
How much confidence should fans have in Donovan Edwards moving forward?
Well, I mean, he's done a good job. He hasn't played a ton. He's been banged up all season as well. He played against Ohio State on Saturday with a broken left thumb. So they're going to try and give it a go with him. I suspect he's going to play again and get some carries. But as we saw, it was a slow start for him. His early in the game, he struggled. It seemed like he got stronger as the game went on, and that's how Michigan kind of was able to put Ohio State away. But with him, Michigan's running game will probably be a bit limited. They're probably going to have to be forced to throw the ball, which up until last week we had concerns about. But as we saw in Columbus, that they were able to figure it out, and they had some plays ready.
Were you surprised that they were able to produce offensively the way that they did against Ohio State? I mean, coming in as 8-point underdogs, even though both teams highly touted matchup and the rivalry goes so deep. I mean, did that surprise you that they were able to produce in that way?
Yeah, I was. I wasn't expecting them to win last week, given the fact that Donovan Edwards was banged up. Blake Corum his status was unknown. I figured they would have to throw the ball a lot, and I figured that they would struggle doing it. We just hadn't seen it all season long. I mean, they had shied away from the passing game. They had leaned on the rushing attack week after week. It was their strength and kind of their bread and butter identity of their offense, and it was working for them. So there's really no reason to go to the passing game. But we were wondering, what would happen if they had to do it. And they did Saturday against Ohio State. They're successful doing it to the point where Ohio State, I think, was caught off guard in some regards. They left Michigan a lot in man coverage. Michigan was able to beat them one-on-one with some of those routes, and the receivers got wide open. So I suspect they're going to have to do something similar against Purdue on Saturday. The difference this week, at least, is some of it's on tape. So Purdue can prepare for a little bit of it. But, from a talent perspective, I just think the Boilermakers are probably going to be overmatched.
How important is that aspect moving forward into the playoffs? In other words, they're not really going to surprise anybody now. And with Donovan Edwards maybe being limited, and obviously we know that Blake Corum is likely done for the year. I mean, how concerned should fans be that they are essentially one-dimensional moving forward?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a concern. I mean, last year against Georgia in the playoff, they essentially were one-dimensional. They tried running the ball and couldn't do it. Georgia forced them to throw it, and they couldn't do that either. So I suspect it could be a similar recipe should they meet Georgia again in the playoff. Luckily for Michigan, the way things are lining up, assuming they do win the Big Ten championship on Saturday, they're probably going to be matched up against a TCU or USC in the first round. I think that's a little bit more favorable of a matchup for Michigan than Georgia in the first round. But I think if Michigan gets to the championship game and plays the Bulldogs, I think they're going to be overmatched again.
What have you learned this season about J.J. McCarthy, a sophomore quarterback who has changed the dynamic of this team a little bit? What value has he added that maybe they didn't even have a year ago?
Yeah, you nailed it. He's added a different dynamic, and it's with his legs. I mean, last year, Cade McNamara was very successful. He's 12-2 as a starter, put up a lot of numbers, did some great things, but the mobility wasn't really there. And that was the knock against him. He had a decent arm. He was a game manager and everything else, but J.J. McCarthy just brought this different dimension with his legs. He could extend the field, pick up first downs as needed. And you kind of saw that Saturday against Ohio State, especially in that second half. They kind of let him loose a little bit. He was able to pick up some big key plays and big yardage, and it made a difference. So I think, and that was something Jim Harbaugh wanted, I think, from the get-go. He wanted a kind of a two-way quarterback, a more mobile quarterback, and JJ's brought that. He struggled in some regard in the passing game this year. Up until Saturday against Ohio State, they really struggled with the deep ball, but his legs were kind of bailing him out week after week. So he's brought a different dynamic. He's I think, helped the offense come along and helped extend the rushing game.
This team, looking for back-to-back Big Ten titles, has had phenomenal success this season. Just speaking to a couple of fans around my office, I mean, they're thrilled with where this program is. And Jim Harbaugh has a lot to do with that. I mean, how settled do you think he feels now with the university, kind of where he is in his coaching career, and does that experience of capturing a Big Ten title in the past and the success that they've had help prepare them even better for the weekend?
Yeah, things have drastically turned around. I can remember a couple of years ago, going into the 2021 season, there were all these question marks around Michigan. They're coming off arguably their worst season in a couple of decades. They were struggling on the field. As Jim Harbaugh put it at one point, people weren't talking about us anymore. We needed to kind of drum up some excitement. And they were able to do so last year. I think they caught a lot of folks off guard. They caught a lot of teams in the Big Ten off guard with their kind of new identity and smash mouth offense. And he's really carried it over into this year, to his credit. I think a lot of folks didn't think this was coming. Jim really struggled, from 2017 to 2020 to kind of develop an identity and get some, consistency in this Michigan program. He's found it the last couple of years. He overhauled his coaching staff last year. Went back again to the kind of the offensive identity that he grew up playing in and was successful doing with the San Francisco 49ers and at Stanford. And it's played a lot of success. It's interesting because football, especially in the college game, has become so based in the spread and high octane offenses. And he's kind of gone the opposite way. I think he looked at the success Ohio State was having in the Big Ten and looked at it and realized we probably weren't going to beat them doing that, so we have to go a different path. And they've done that, and they've been successful the last couple of years, and it's really changed momentum. Credit to him. He's flirted with the NFL about the possibility of going back. But I genuinely, the last couple of weeks, he seems very, happy, excited, more relaxed than I've seen him in years.
Yeah, so you get the sense that if the program is doing well, or if the players that he has recruited come in and kind of execute his vision for what he wants Michigan to be stylistically, that he very much wants this university to be part of his legacy. I mean, that sort of itch that you alluded to leave, to go to the NFL, that might actually be gone. I mean, this might be where he wants to sort of make his mark and be remembered.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the NFL is ever going to go away. I do think there's part of him that still wants to get back there and win a Super Bowl. I mean, he said in the offseason last year when he was flirting with the Minnesota Vikings. But I generally think that the success they've had the last couple of years has convinced him, that this is the place to be. I mean, remember the knock against Jim before he even got to Michigan was that he never could last more than 4 years at any stop. He was always looking for that next stop, that next challenge, that next opportunity, and I think he's found it at Michigan. It took him some time. There were a lot of critics a few years ago. There's a lot of backlash. I think he was feeling the heat in some regards. But to his credit, as I said, he overhauled the coaching staff. He made a lot of changes internally. The culture has generally changed in Ann Arbor, and they're winning because of it.
When you look at the matchup against Purdue, they do have Charlie Jones, one of the most productive wide receivers in college football. I mean, where are the potential issues for Michigan in terms of this specific matchup?
I think just that Charlie Jones and Aiden O'Connell. I mean, those are two prolific offensive players. Aiden O'Connell's put up a lot of yards, over 3,000 passing yards. They've had some big games. The one good thing, I guess, for Michigan is that they've really only got to worry about those two. Charlie Jones is kind of their bread and butter, their offense. He's the guy they like to get the football to. And if they can keep it out of his hands or at least limit him, I think Michigan will be okay. The nice thing about the Michigan defense is they haven't really relied on one area all year long. Last year it was the pass rush. Everyone talked about Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo and the productivity and all the sacks. That productivity hasn't been there this year, but they've done it in other ways. They've gotten pressure from the secondary. They've gotten help from the linebackers. And I think if they, again, and it's been very much a bend, don't break defense. So if they continue that Saturday against Purdue and keep Purdue out of the end zone, they might rack up some yards. They might get going in the first half, but Michigan's shown all season long that they've been a second half team. And I suspect that's going to be a similar case on Saturday.
Michigan's defense has the third-ranked defense in the nation in terms of points allowed, and they've got a new defensive coordinator. I mean, can you speak to the influence that Jesse Mintner has had on the program and where you think they've gotten better and how that ultimately sets them up to be successful heading into the playoffs?
Yeah, he's really picked up where Mike McDonald left off last year. McDonald was a first-year coordinator from the Baltimore Ravens. Jim brought him in, and he kind of tasked him to overhaul everything that was going on. He did so. He made kind of more of an all-11 unit, and Jesse's kind of extended that. To his credit, he came in with a couple of new assistant coaches himself, and they all looked around and said, hey, we realize we don't have an Aiden Hutchinson, we don't have a David Ajabo, so we've kind of got to lean on the talent we have. There are no first-round picks on this this Michigan defense. It's a bunch of guys. It's a group of guys that they've done a very good job of putting in good positions. They aren't afraid to rotate. They aren't afraid to substitute. And they've leaned on some guys that really have flown under the radar. For example, in the secondary, a guy by the name of Mike Sanders, he was a receiver last year. He was a 3-star recruit out of high school, didn't make a huge impact, but they flipped him to the defense, and he's been a starter. He's been a game changer. He had a big game against Ohio State. So they've found ways to, accentuate some of the strengths they have and hide the weaknesses. And that's why this Michigan defense has been so good.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts for me about college football is when you find these kids who, kind of came from nowhere, and you have a coach or a scheme that fits their skill set, and all of a sudden they explode and they get put on the map. I mean, it's great to have first round draft picks on your team, obviously, and those guys are going to be big stars. But when you can kind of cobble it together with guys who are talented, who fit with the vision for the defensive coordinator, I think that's really fun too. I mean, outside of maybe leaning into the rotational aspect, what else should we be looking for schematically that he's had success with, particularly as not only, you face a couple of wide receivers that are talented at Purdue, but even moving forward, what has he done schematically that's been a little bit different?
It's been just that, the IQ. He's very good at second half adjustments. They've been doing a very good job of blitzing with the secondary. They aren't afraid, as I mentioned, they aren't afraid to rotate on third down up front with the edge rushers. They realized that they weren't going to have a bunch of guys that could play 60, 70 snaps a game. So they've done a very good job of crunching them down and giving guys 20, 30 snaps, bringing them in certain positions and kind of disguising things. They're keeping offenses guessing. And I feel like this Michigan defense, because of that, they've gotten stronger as games have worn on. And that kind of goes to the discrepancy between the first and second half. And we saw that play out over the weekend against the Buckeyes. They outscored Ohio State 28-3, in the second half. And obviously the offense kind of woke up and the running game got going. But a big reason for that was because of the defense. They're forcing 3-and-outs. They're forcing punts. They're forcing turnover on downs. And really, they've gotten stronger as games are going on. That's a credit, obviously, to the players. But Michigan, as I've said, Jim Harbaugh's done a very good job of bringing in smart, high IQ assistant coaches that can adjust on the fly and kind of tailor things to their strengths. And Jesse Minter, along with Michigan's quartet of assistants, have done a good job of that.
If there's one thing that we've seen, Aaron, in college football, it's that one loss can have a dramatic impact on how, who we're going to see in the college football playoff. Can you kind of lay out for us, what are the implications of this game against Purdue? If they go out there and blow it, and let's say they drop this game, how does that ultimately impact what we're going to see in the playoff?
That's a good question, and something I don't really know. Any of us know. I mean, it's going to depend on what happens around him, right? If TCU can win and USC wins, and there isn't a ton of chaos, I think Michigan's fine. They still get in the playoff. I think they're still going to get a spot. I think the resume is too good. I mean, keep in mind they're unbeaten. They just knocked off what was the number 2 team in the country. So I think from a resume standpoint, Michigan probably has the second best in the country right now. So assuming they don't get blown out on Saturday and maybe they lose closely, I think they're still in. Obviously, a win is priority. They want to do that to secure their spot. But I think Michigan has done enough to this point where I think the committee is confident in them, and I think they've got a spot pretty much no matter what.
We've talked about Michigan's defense, how they've been stout, and maybe some of the things that they're dealing with offensively, and also some of the weapons that Purdue has. When you look at this matchup a little bit more closely, outside of some of the wide receiving threats that Purdue has, what would you say is the second most impactful factor heading into this game that Michigan will have to be aware of?
Yeah, they've got a secondary that I think is carried off a little bit the last few weeks, but they've done a good job at forcing turnovers. I think they got 13 interceptions this year. Michigan has done a very good job of not turning the ball over, so I think that's key. But again, Michigan haven't been prone to making a ton of mistakes this year. So I think if they can keep the mistakes low, I think they'll be okay. But Purdue's done a good job of forcing those. So I think if they're going to do that, that's probably going to be a key area for them to stay in the game.
And just, not a score prediction as much as your gut feeling based on what you've seen. Obviously, the Blake Corum storyline is huge. Do you feel like with where this team is, what they've done this season, they're equipped to not overlook this game?
I think so. I mean, they've been in this situation before. They were here last year. They were coming off the high of beating Ohio State last year. And you saw what happened. They went out and beat Iowa 42-3. It wasn't really a game. I don't think the score will be as lopsided this year, but I think Michigan ends up kind of blowing this thing open in the second half. They've shown a knack for keeping close with their opponent in the first half for weeks now. I suspect that'll probably be a similar situation. I think Purdue just has enough of firepower offensively to kind of keep up. But again, as I said, I think as the game wears on, this Michigan defense or this Michigan team has done a good job of kind of playing a full 4-quarter game. And I think by the end of it, they're going to run away and probably win this game by 2 or 3 scores.
One last thing I just want to ask you about, Aaron, before I let you go. Mazi Smith facing a felony weapons charge. What do you know about that from what you've been reporting on, and also his availability heading into the weekend?
Yeah, so he was charged earlier this week here in Ann Arbor District Court for possessing a felony weapon. This incident actually occurred back in October. We're just now hearing about it. He was arrested at the time, but never jailed and released, pending a prosecutor investigation. Investigation is completed. He was charged this week, but Michigan sounds like they're going to let him play. Head coach Jim Harbaugh and their athletic director Ward Emanuel both released a statement on Thursday saying that they believe in Mazi's character and they believe this was just a mistake, and there's no plan to suspend him or anything else. So I expect him to be available on Saturday. He hasn't missed any game. He started all 12 games at this point, and it sounds like he's going to start again on Saturday.
If for some reason he isn't available moving forward, how impactful will that be?
It would be huge. Michigan doesn't have a ton of depth in the interior of the defensive line. They've leaned on him all season long. He's been relatively healthy. They do have some guys they can put in there, but nothing, I think, of the size or caliber or strength of Mazi Smith. So keep in mind, he was named college football's #1 freak before the season started. He's a physical specimen. He moves guys, and Michigan's really leaned on him. He's one of those guys that is successful, but it just does, the results don't show up on the stat sheet. Doesn't get a ton of tackles. He's often double teamed, which just kind of opens things up for other guys in the defensive line. So he's been a big part of the defense. He was voted captain by his teammates. He's well respected, so it would be a huge blow.
Are you surprised that Jim Harbaugh would come out and defend a player like this? I mean, is this in his nature to sort of push a guy through, especially a talented player like that, or should there be more pause when considering a charge of this nature?
I was a little surprised because Jim Harbaugh has in the past. I mean, he suspended guys for lesser stuff. So it sounds like a situation where they want the rest of the facts to come out. Maybe they think the charges will be dropped. I don't know. But yeah, it is a head scratching move. He suspended players in the past. He has been unafraid of dismissing players from his team. And I'm not saying that this is that serious, but yeah, a little bit surprised. Usually 1 game suspension would suffice in a situation like this. But nonetheless, as I mentioned, him and athletic director Ward Emanuel do seem pretty gung-ho and pretty confident in defending him in Mazi's character.
Aaron McMann, great insight from Michigan ahead of the Big Ten championship. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.